freelance writer, a webmaster, and a videographer. And you read his resume here, and he's a man of many, many talents. To date, he has written 2 mystery novels, Degrees of Murder and Out of Order. He has also written the play Unfriendly Fire and the award-winning screenplay Something Bright and Alien. As a webmaster, he has created and managed 3 websites. As a videographer, he has recorded, edited, and posted 126 videos on YouTube, most dealing with community environmental activities. He has designed and implemented training simulations for computer-based service delivery networks, for military manufacturing and NASA electronics workers, and for teachers working in public and parochial school systems, as well as for university faculty. He has taught courses in conference leadership, education, group dynamics, and interpersonal communication, interviewing and counseling for managers, and sociology. He has served as organizational development consultant for client corporations and institutions, both domestically and abroad. In the military and industry, he has investigated various incidents involving government security violations, line of duty investigations, suspected break-ins, and theft. Kevin?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for coming this evening as well. 59 years ago, I enrolled as a freshman in a very small university that has become this fantastic entity that we're partaking in now. It's amazing the changes that happened in the last 6 decades or so over the space and what it can do. I'm going to start, although I originally enrolled as a speech and theater major, my voice is no longer reliable. I have autoimmune disease and sometimes the voice will give out. So I'm going to start with reading from the book and then I'll deal with questions afterwards. And this is an excerpt from the second book, Out of Order. And what do you suppose is the purpose of a meeting that may involve such diverse groups as members of our federal government, local mafiosi, and South American drug lords? And where exactly will that meeting take place? That is what we will be telling you in subsequent reports, but for now, this is Jessica Shanehoffen, WNYK TV News in the Hudson River Valley, on assignment. The screen shifted back to David Warren. We'll have more on Jessica Shanehoffen's upcoming exclusive investigative reports following these messages. Watching the news broadcast alone in her motel room, Jessica felt more frightened than ever before in her life. As her taped segment gave way to commercials, she pressed the remote, turning off the television, and remained huddled in the upholstered chair as darkness cloaked the room. My God, you've killed me, David. John Canjami set the video remote down at his desk and pressed the button on the communications console. A moment later, Carl Maggio entered the study. Yes, boss? That news broad on WNYK TV, the investigative reporter. You know the one I mean, Shanehoffen, the blonde. Carl nods. Oh yeah, the snooper. Madre. What? It was her. I wondered why the broad looked familiar. I mean, up there in the woods. Only her hair looked darker than on TV, but it was her. You saw her up there today? Yeah. When Vinny and I were standing guard at the drive up to the lodge, there was this gal went by in a small car, Suzuki, Pennsylvania, LOJ 4783. She drove up to where we were blocking the lodge drive that went on up the mountain. She came back down just before you and the big guy came up. We talked about it when you got there, remember? Jesus, I do remember. We had the window open. Senator Ralston wants to smell the country, right? I saw her too, you're right, Carl. It was her, but with darker hair. Canjami shook his head, smiling briefly. The broad changes her hair color and practically sits in on our meeting. Christ, she's got stones. Canjami paused for a minute thinking, then he continued. Okay, she's probably still in the area snooping around. So you and Vinny are going to do some snooping too. Get on up there and find that damn broad, and when you do find her, make sure that she goes into early retirement, get it? But, and this is a must, Carl, make it look like an accident. One that no one will ever question, get me? An accident her mother wouldn't doubt. Canjami smiled thinly as he continued. When you said I got a number this morning, I didn't get it. You got her license number. You're a champ, Carl, and that's a fact. Give that number to Ralphie and get the name it's listed under. I'm on it, boss. It was approaching sundown by the time Sister Gabriel finally loaded her car and drove out of the retreat area. It seemed strangely lonely after the departure of the conference attendees who had made the area briefly vibrant. Except for a couple of retreat center staff vehicles, Sister Gabriel's car was the last to depart, driving cautiously back down the mountain toward US 9W. She didn't even notice the darkened sedan parked in a tree-surrounded vehicle overlook as she glided carefully along the twisting lane, her hands tight on the steering wheel, her attention on the sinuously shifting road. In that sedan sat the two hoodlums, waiting for what they believed was Jessica's car to show up. Bingo, there she is. Give her a few seconds, Vinny, before you start it up. Okay, let's do it. Vinny turned the key in the ignition, starting the vehicle. He waited 15 seconds and backed out of the parking space, turning on the headlights as he straightened the vehicle on the road. Sister Gabriel's car was still visible farther down the road. Vinny accelerated slowly, reducing the distance between the two cars to no more than 50 yards as they made their way down to US 9W. Taking no notice of the car coming down the mountain behind her, Sister Gabriel turned right onto US 9W and headed south toward Bear Mountain. The heavy sedan followed, maintaining a discreet short distance between the two cars. So now what, Carl? We'll pull her over just south of the Bear Mountain traffic circle. Then we'll take her car up into the mountain on that road where the boss picked up the sender. We'll dump her off near the top. End of her story. Sounds good to me. One nosy troublemaker out of business. Carl reached behind the driver's seat, picking up a powerful spotlight. Unwinding its cord, he plugged it into the car's outlet. Then he drove carefully, staying just close enough to their quarry's car to discourage other traffic from pulling between them. Sister Gabriel paid no more attention to the traffic around her than was necessary to drive safely. Her mind was filled with issues raised during the conference. As she approached the Bear Mountain Bridge traffic circle, her mind returned to her recent conversation with Sister Michael, in which they had fretted about the impact of the drug trade on their students and their communities. Nothing she had heard at the conference had eased her concerns. On the contrary, the pervasiveness of symptoms only served to convince her that it was a major problem for which few had any useful remedial action. She waited as a parade of vehicles entered the traffic circle from the west and finally pulled in behind the last of that bunch before incoming traffic from the bridge and from the south cut her off. She paid no attention to the large sedan that followed closely behind her through the traffic circle and out the other side. Thus she was startled when a spotlight dazzled her from behind just as she passed the entry road to the Overlook Lodge, where Jessica Shanehoffen and her crew had spied on Senator Ralston. Startled and curious, Sister Gabriel pulled to the side as the challenging vehicle slid in behind hers. She waited behind the wheel as someone got out of the vehicle behind her and approached her car on the driver's side. She didn't notice the passenger door of the other vehicle open, nor did she see the second man get out and slowly approach her car on the passenger side. She rolled down the driver's side window and waited for what she believed was a police officer. She was surprised and a bit alarmed to see a young man in civilian clothes standing next to her door. He smiled, though, and seemed pleasant enough as he began to speak. Sorry to inconvenience you, ma'am, but we're searching for a lost child. We're stopping motorists on the chance that somebody might have seen her in this area. Have you seen this little girl? The man reached back with his right hand as if taking a wallet from his back pocket and brought out a silencer-equipped pistol. Then he squeezed the trigger twice and Sister Gabriel's dead body slumped toward the passenger side of the car. Carl came around the car in a rush, anger distorting his usually expressionless face into a mask of rage. Jesus, Vinny, what did you do that for? All we needed to do was grab her, slug her, and take her up the mountain, and the fall would have done the rest. What's the matter with you? Where the hell did you get that thing anyway? Now we got to get rid of it too. Jesus. Put the damn cannon away, Vinny. Shove her body into the passenger side, get behind the wheel, and follow me. Move, damn it, before we draw a crowd. As Vinny looked at Colonel dumbfounded, Carl shook his head. Never mind, get in. Follow me up the road into the park, and I'll find a spot to push her over. Do it right, and the fire will end any investigation. Come on, let's go. Carl walked back to the large sedan and got in, while Vinny walked around the Suzuki and slid behind the wheel, adjusting the seat as he did so. What the hell did you do that for? He mimicked, stung by Carl's reaction to what Vinny considered an excellent kill. Angrily, he pushed the slumped body of the dead nun below the window level of the passenger seat. Nosy. Bitch, he muttered. Then, glancing for the first time at the slim corpse in the passenger seat, he lamented, "A waste of good flesh." The engine was still running. He toggled the headlight flasher twice to let Carl know that he was ready to follow him, and the big sedan moved off in the fading daylight. Within a quarter of a mile, they came to the traffic light that controlled traffic into and out of Bear Mountain Park. A green arrow favored inbound traffic, which branched slightly to the right of US 9W and up toward the Bear Mountain Inn. The big sedan followed that route with the Suzuki a car length behind. Once they were past the inn, the road twisted and turned constantly as he climbed steeply upward, with little in the way of straight sections to ease the trip. Then he didn't like mountain roads. His hands were sweating in the gray undertaker's gloves he and Carl had worn that evening to avoid leaving fingerprints. "Jesus, Carl," he muttered nervously. "Where did you find this road, for Christ's sake? Couldn't we have just dropped in the river somewhere? No, we gotta climb stinking mountains. I wish, oh, now what?" The lead car was slowing down even more than the road demanded. Then Vinny saw the fork in the road and realized that Carl was probably making a decision. After a moment, the big sedan sped up a bit, taking the right fork, which was the Francis Perkins Memorial Drive. The sign said that it led to a lookout tower on the top of Bear Mountain. Gripping the steering wheel more tightly, Vinny muttered softly, "Great, Everest, here we come. Next time, damn it, I picked the spot." To Vinny, the next 10 minutes were at least an hour long, but they finally arrived at the mountaintop, and Carl led them back down the mountain for a short distance until they came back again to a spot at which he had slowed the cars on the way to the peak. Carl pulled the big sedan close to the mountain's flank, opposite a place where there was a break in a series of protected pilings that were driven into the edge of a steep drop-off. The space was wide enough to permit the passage of an automobile. The sedan's lights switched off. Vinny turned off the Suzuki's but left the engine running. Carl left the sedan and walked the short distance over to where Vinny stood beside the Suzuki. "Okay, Vinny, let's get this done before some lovebirds come slipping along. Put her back in the driver's seat. Use a seatbelt too, Vinny. She was a good girl, but got into a tricky curve that couldn't handle. We'll set her up, car and drive, headlights on, trunk open, you steer it through that gap while I push it a little to get it moving. Before we push it over, I'll drop a fusee in the trunk. When it hits bottom, the gas tank will tear loose, and in a couple of minutes, we've got ourselves ablaze. Bye-bye Jessica Shane Hoffman, bye-bye evidence. Got it?" Vinny nodded, saying nothing. "Okay, I'll get a fusee." Vinny struggled with the body, trying to avoid touching the blood that trickled from the head wounds. Petite though Sister Gabriel may have been, her body challenged Vinny as a dead weight in a cramped space, while he struggled to put her back into the driver's position and buckle her in, finally pulling the trunk opening lever for Carl's plan. Carl was back with a fusee, sometimes known as a railroad flare, ready to ignite before Vinny finished. Putting the car in drive didn't start it moving toward the gap in the barricade, so Vinny propped her foot against the pedal with just enough pressure to start the car moving. He quickly stepped away, slamming the driver's door shut and guiding the steering wheel until it approached the gap. Carl ignited the flare, dropped it into the trunk, and shut the trunk lid, turning back quickly toward the sedan and getting in as Vinny guided the Suzuki through the gap, and then run back toward the sedan, also getting in. They began to roll forward down the road as the Suzuki's taillights disappeared from view over the cliff edge. They were out of sight before the Suzuki hit bottom. That's it. Most of my writing in early in life, except for a novel I wrote when I was about 12 years old, which should have been forgotten when I was 12 and a half, was professional, academic, and industrial writing for a lot of years. And I often wondered, could I really do something in the fiction genre? Finally, about 30 years ago, I had a chance to begin working on that, and that's where the first book in the series, Degrees of Murder, came from. Interestingly enough, these books are all the result of a story that I started writing in 1992 when we were on the train to Seattle, Joanne and I. And I had too much time on my hands and a new laptop computer to work with. And it's amazing what kind of trouble you can get into that. So there were things going on in the train that inspired me to create a story that led to the development of Degrees of Murder and then disappeared because I couldn't use the original story in it. I came back to that original story to write my second novel, and I got very deeply into it and realized it didn't fit what I was trying to do, and so Out of Order came up. I'm now back to that original novel again, and I suspect that it's also going to disappear a third time, but I'm not sure yet. So that's kind of the genesis of the writing that I've done. I've written other things. Unfriendly Fire was a play based on the massacre at Republic Steel in 1937, the Labor Day Massacre, and Memorial Day Massacre, I'm sorry. And so that was interesting. We premiered it in 2003 with Studs Terkel kicking it off the first night. That was fun. Joanne and I had to go pick him up because we couldn't trust public transportation to get him out there. Richie was with us too in the back, as a matter of fact. And to drive Studs across the city of Chicago in rush hour is interesting because for every half-mile street he had a story. And it was just fascinating. And as we were driving down the street, he kept talking about these people who seemed to have the same ear disease that he'd had when he was a child, and then you realize they were all holding cell phones. So we had a great time with him, and he kicked the thing off, and he was going to sneak out when it was over, but he got caught up in the play, so he gave us the benediction when it ended too, and that was a great experience for all of us. Apparently Studs enjoyed it too. And then we missed the second night because I was covering theater for the Times at the time, and
Molly West.
no, Molly West was the third night, but I'm trying to remember the attorney who was.
Leon Dupre.
Yeah, Leon Dupre kicked it off the second night because he had just started a law firm to work to help the strikers at the time of the strike. Molly West, who kicked it off the third night, had been one of the combatants in the battlefield the day that the so-called massacre happened. So it was an interesting event. We had, I guess, more than 500 people in 3 nights show up for that event. So it was a fun experience to do that. That was a fun experience too. So that's the only play we've had performed so far. But there was, yes.
Where was it performed?
It was performed at the Union Hall, the union that emerged from that strike.
Wow.
It was performed at that Union Hall on the east side.
Oh.
It was.
I'm sorry to have missed it.
Yeah, it was right across the street from where the massacre had taken place. There was a lot of history, and of course there was a lot of feeling in it too. You have said a lot about my experiences with POD, or print-on-demand publishing. I was a little bit different. I worked with Booklocker. I did the work with Amazon. I did the work with Barnes and Noble and all that sort of stuff. But it's the same kind of experience, but also the e-books and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Our histories overlap in many ways, both with the 60s, with education, all this sort of stuff. So it's like deja vu. Although I'm Irish, my wife's Polish, half our family is Italian. So it's like, we were talking about things, I'm saying, yeah, that's Gene and Joe. You know, so all of this overlap is really, it's kind of interesting to see the way human beings express themselves and how what we do share that we have in common. We don't even realize it until we have moments like this. I'll prattle on mindlessly, so if you have questions, please. Yes.
In writing mystery stories, do you have to do a lot of research work and to get things to fall into place and do other?
Bear Mountain, we spent years, well, many trips driving out to Bear Mountain. Why we chose it to begin with, I can't remember anymore why I did, but it just seemed like we got to do this. It's got to be Bear Mountain. And so we did an awful lot of making sure you go back on Google and look at the roads, and then all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, that's not the name I remember as I'm looking at the road names. So then we had to go back and see, what is the Francis Perkins Drive? Was it really? So those details matter. Yeah, if you want to be accurate, and I do, then there's a lot of research that goes into it.
So it makes it fun when you go on vacation. You have to try to figure out where a body could be dropped.
Yeah, we did. We found the place on the drive we did. Yes, sir.
I'd like to know, at what point do you stop? Because you're making believe, and how do you know when to stop?
To end the story?
Yeah.
Or to come out of, don't you have to go into a certain mindset to keep making up and making up and making up? And how do you pull yourself out of it?
I don't know if I can answer that because I don't think of myself as having done it exactly that way.
Okay.
You do, but you have to get into the story. You have to get into the idea of what's going on with these people and why is it going on, does it make sense? So there is that. I don't know about what you're describing. Reminds me of when I was in theater and people would talk about Stanislavski, do you become the character, all that kind of stuff. And I only had that kind of experience once on a stage where I actually got carried away and all of a sudden we were into another universe. But most of the time it was just you perform the part and try to be as legitimate as you can be. So I don't remember getting caught into the writing in that way so much as knowing when to end it, but usually for me the endings were what I was driving toward. I knew how I wanted to end it when I wrote the first two. Problem I'm having with the third one is I'm not quite sure what I'm doing with it yet. And that's a few years now I've been trying to ask myself that question. So I don't, if I've done what you're describing, I don't think of it in those terms. I can't say. I'm sorry, that's the best I can do with that. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
As we heard about your introduction that Liz gave, you had a very rich professional life, so I was just wondering what your proudest accomplishment was since graduating.
Jen, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble. My hearing isn't good
Proudest
anymore.
accomplishment.
Since
Say it.
Your
graduating.
proudest accomplishment of all the work you've done?
My proudest accomplishment. Think about that.
It would help if
Besides
you...
marrying your lovely wife.
I was gonna-
Yeah, no question. Without her, there'd be no way. That's not a joke. She has been the inspiration that made a profound difference in my life. Proudest accomplishment in terms of writing. I am proud of the work that I've done. The finished products, I guess, is that what I have to say. Those that are finished that I'm not disgusted with. The disgusted ones get round up. But those that are finished that have done something that I really want to do satisfy me. I'm proud of those. I don't know that I pick out one in particular. If I do, it's certainly not there at the moment. Joanne, do you think of anything that I usually
It's
go crazy about?
Unfriendly Fire because it was so much of a community.
Well, yeah, Unfriendly Fire was, I'm talking mostly, I think, about fictional work and things I've created, but Unfriendly Fire was a fantastic experience because I was drafted into it. That's one of the things that delayed publication of the second book. I was working, I finally got on a roll and some friends said, hey, let's do some theater over here because we've been talking about doing it for a long time in the community. And I said, well, yeah, my big mouth that got us into it to begin with. So we went along and all of a sudden I was drafted by one of the union people said, you got to write about the massacre. And I thought, oh, tell me about it. And all of a sudden then we got totally sucked into that and it became a very involving experience for a long time. That was a proud achievement, definitely, once we put it all together. And the interesting thing was I couldn't direct it. I refused to direct it because it was just too close. So we chose a director, and then they wanted me to work with her, and I said, I can't do that because I'll get in her way. So I pulled out of it. And when I pulled out of it, they changed the play. And I hated what they did with it because I had tried to treat it as human beings in a complex situation, and it became a political diatribe by the time they did it. But what I was really proud of in it was that the people we selected had never been on stage before. And in the performances, they were fantastic.
So how many books did you sell in your mystery novels?
I'm not sure of the count, but a couple of hundred, I guess. It's not fantastic. I don't know, sometimes we have e-books and things like that, and I'm never sure because all of a sudden you'll get something in from the e-publishing. But I'm not going to get wealthy with it. But it was fun doing it. And of course, it's nice when people, one of the fun experiences with it was the first time we had a reading in the community, the library invited me to come and address a reading club. And they'd all read the books, and they were having a great time with it because they were in the community, and these books are set kind of in the community, although I call it something else. There is no Lackenby in Illinois, but the characters live in Lackenby. But if you thought it was southeast Chicago, you wouldn't be too far off. And they were trying to figure out where all these places were. I got such a kick out of this one woman. She said, I want to go to that restaurant, that Chinese restaurant. And I say, that was fiction. What did it go to? Yeah, so those kinds of things are fun. When you deal with people who've actually read the book and have reactions to it, they like, don't like, those kinds of things. That's a lot of fun. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Anthony Moore, and the question that I have actually is for all the authors. And it's a question that pertains to self-publishing versus going with a publisher. Because I actually have a self-published book out now on winning scholarships for college entitled Scholarship Rich. and I've done my thing with that book, and I have a follow-up for that book that I'm wrapping up. And I actually have somebody in the publishing industry who's interested in it. And so the question that I have is, what would you say are the pros and cons of self-publishing versus going with a publisher, especially since, as Tony mentioned earlier, you might still have to do a lot of marketing yourself if you go with a publisher?
Since I'm at the microphone right now, I'll take the first crack at it. For me, there are no advantages to being published by a major publisher. If I were doing the work that my publisher, Angela Hoy, who runs Book Locker, has always taught us how to do and recommended how to do. She runs a great Writers Weekly. If you're interested in getting into on the internet, Writers Weekly is an excellent publication for people who want to write and want to know about the business. She's not selling herself per se. She's fought battles against Amazon, among other things. And if I were doing what she suggested, I'd be wealthy. I'm not a marketer. I'm a writer. You know, and I've never been a marketer, or I'd be in some other part of the world probably doing marketing. So if I were a good marketer, everything I've done with Book Locker, the books are high quality, you can see them there. These are just play around samples so anybody can riffle through them. The sale copies are hidden away. And if I did the things that she suggested, I would be highly successful. And they're doable, but I don't do them. You know, it's like, you ought to lose weight. Yeah, I know. But it's, sometimes the doing it is not as easy to lay out for an individual because of his own shortcomings and limitations and so forth. But yes, I would say print on demand today and electronic publishing are fantastic. If you work with good people, I would work with Book Locker. There are other people out there who are probably good. But I had originally dealt with publishers and I got positive feedback from 2 publishers, but they said we can't take a risk. Thank you, IRS. When the IRS said you can't keep a big stockpile of books and get rid of them over a lot of years and write them off over a lot of years, publishers stopped taking risks. They said, well, I want you to be another Tom Clancy. I want you to be, you know, something. And they said, no, I'm not. So that's what the guys were saying. We like the story. We don't think we can make money out of it. We're not sure we can. We can't take the risk. It happened twice. I said, I'm done with it. I started researching print on demand then, and I finally discovered Angela and Book Locker, and I said, yeah, I'm going to try that. I've never regretted it. I've been with them since 2000, and they're great for me. So I wouldn't even think about a real publisher now because I'd have to do the same thing. If I really want to be successful with a large publisher, I'm going to have to get out and do the marketing. I can do the marketing. If I could, I'd do it. I don't need them. And especially with the technology today, we can print, we can make books. Thank you, Apple. We can make books. And there are other publishers, programs out there who will make it possible. I can print things today that if I could have done today what I could do, if I could have done it in education and industry, what I can do today with a Mac, I would have thought I was already in heaven. So we have tremendous tools that are beck and call now. And then it's up for us to get out and do it. So if you can find a publisher that's crazy about what you do, I'd say fine. But otherwise, I would look at print on demand and self-publishing in that respect. I think the publishers today are becoming dinosaurs, and I think they know it. They're going to have to become different. I've said enough on that, I think. If you have any other questions about what I just said, fine. If not, let's answer that question.